Hi everyone, I'm David Fisher and this is Presidential Chronicles, the series of books and videos on American history as seen through the lives of the Presidents of the United States. This episode is from the life of James Monroe, and the focus is doctrine. The year is 1819. James Monroe is really the first president in American history to date where foreign policy isn't really focused on Europe. It's not about conflict with Britain or conflict with France. Those are relatively stable right now. His foreign policy is much more focused on the Americas. Now, the United States had been the forerunner, if you will, of colonial uprisings back in the 1770s when they rebelled against the mother country of England and eventually secured its own independence in the 1780s after victory in the Revolutionary War. Well, there were other states in North and South America that were also interested in having an uprising against their mother country, and in particular, Spain was very vulnerable. The Spanish Empire was not what it used to be, the Spanish power wasn't what it used to be, and they were really struggling to contain the independence movements of some of these colonies in South America that were breaking free one sort of after another and declaring their independence as new independent republics. And in fact, the United States was among the first to recognize their American brethren in South America as independent states. The question was, what else was going on between the United States and Spain in the Americas that also was sort of coming to the fore at this same time? And that was centered on the Floridas. And we covered this a bit in a previous episode where the United States had actually sent soldiers into the Floridas, Spanish-held territory, because some Indians who were doing some attacks on American citizens were hiding out in Florida. And again, became a whole military entanglement that again we covered in a prior episode. But what that entanglement showed was that Spain was simply not capable of policing its own territory in the Floridas. It was having the trouble in South America. It was also having the trouble in North America in the Floridas. And the United States wanted to put this to bed. Let us just acquire Florida. Give it to us. So Secretary of State John Quincy Adams begins negotiating what eventually is called the Adams-Onis Treaty. What did the United States get? It got Florida, east and west. It had to give up, well, $5 million, it said, was going to be set aside for any outstanding claims by Americans against the Spanish, particularly with respect to Florida. But then there was another negotiation point as well, and that was on the western side of the United States, still related back to that Louisiana Purchase that Monroe had been a principal minister to back in 1803. Well, now the question was, trying to decide definitively where the western boundary of that Louisiana territory was. It had fundamentally been in dispute since Monroe and the Americans had acquired it. The Spanish believed that it stopped at the Sabina River, whereas the Americans were convinced that their territory went all the way to the Rio Grande. The difference is this territory called Texas, a really desirable area from both countries. But in this case, the United States was willing to cede that territory in order to get the Floridas, and that's what got Spain to agree. So the United States gave up a little money, they got the Floridas, but they also conceded the disputed territory west of the Sabina River as part of that Louisiana Purchase. So this finally all came together. Monroe had been trying to acquire the Floridas for about a decade and a half. He had finally done it as President of the United States right at the end of his first term. But all of this was really causing into question what should American foreign policy be with respect to the Americas and the ongoing European influence, as well as what role should the United States have perhaps in the business of Europe. And John Quincy Adams, the Secretary of State, was really noodling about this and coming up with opinions about what the Americans should do, in part because they were concerned about those South American republics. Even though Spain couldn't control them, nothing to say that another European power might not come in and again try to recolonize these areas with a stronger military. So it was time for the Americans, the United States of America, to have an opinion about this role of Europe in the Americas. At least that's what John Quincy Adams said. He said, "The ground that I wish to take is that of earnest remonstrance against interference of European powers by force with South America, but to disclaim all interference on our part of Europe, to make an American cause and adhere inflexibly to that." Basically what he was saying was, Europe, you stay out of the Western Hemisphere and we will stay out of your area, and that's the way it should be. Well, The question was, would the Americans be bold enough to actually state this as policy, and would they go it alone? Because the United States military still was not all that robust. In fact, England, Great Britain, who is now kind of friendly with the United States after the conclusion of the War of 1812, trade is back up again, things are going reasonably well, and Britain wanted to protect its interest in the Americas. So it said, you know what? You, United States, go put out a foreign policy telling Europe to keep out. We'll join you. We'll give you a military, access to our Navy to help enforce this because you probably can't enforce it on your own. Well, the Americans, Monroe and his cabinet, seriously thought about this, and then they rejected it. They said, you know what? We are not going to be beholden to any European state. We're not going to be beholden to Great Britain anymore. We don't need the mother country. We can have our own strong foreign policy, and we'll make that statement ourselves. And that's exactly what James Monroe did. Quincy Adams had sort of the ideas initially. He wrote out a number of the first words, but the doctrine that James Monroe declared in his message to Congress on December 2nd, 1823, was very much his doctrine, which is why it carried his name. And it went something like this. The occasion has been judged proper for asserting as a principle in which the rights and interests of the United States are involved, that the American continents, by the free and independent condition which they have assumed and maintain, are henceforth not to be considered as subjects for future colonization by any European powers. Not just North America, but all of the Americas were off limits to European colonization, according to President James Monroe. He continued to declare that we should consider any attempt on their part, Europe, to extend their system to any portion of this hemisphere as dangerous to our peace and safety. Importantly, Monroe also said, you know what? You stay out of our business, we'll stay out of your business. He said our policy in regard to Europe, which was adopted at an early stage of the wars which have so long agitated that quarter of the globe, is not to fear in the internal concerns of any of its powers. Sounded like a pretty good deal, right? You stay out of ours, we'll stay out of yours. And Monroe added a little kicker. There could be some consequences, folks, if you violate this. He said it is impossible that the Allied powers should extend their political system to any portion of either continent without endangering our peace and happiness. Nor can anyone believe that our southern brethren, if left to themselves, would adopt it of their own accord. So it is equally impossible, therefore, that we should behold such interposition in any form with indifference. Again, you come and violate this new policy, we will not be indifferent. We will be forced to take some action. Well, this was the Monroe Doctrine, and it was a very powerful foreign policy statement. In fact, the boldest foreign policy statement of any American president to date, in part because there wasn't a lot of military power to back it up. But the United States did recognize that it was becoming a global power. Europe relied on the United States for its economy. Trade was incredibly important, and the United States was growing. It was expanding, and this was not a country that you wanted to be an enemy with. It was one that you wanted to trade with. And so part of the mystique about the Monroe Doctrine was it wasn't just backed by a military force. It was backed by the idea that the United States is a growing player on the world stage, and it's far better if we get along than if you try and get on our bad side. And if you want to get on our bad side, just try to recolonize somewhere in the Americas. This was the essence of the Monroe Doctrine, and for the most part, it worked. If you look at the next century, really until the end of the 19th century, there's really only a couple of cases where European states actually come in and have involvement in the Americas. Only a couple. The United States, of course, stays out of European wars really all the way till World War I. In terms of going into battle in Europe. Of course, the Spanish-American War was held in 1898. That had to do with Spain, but that was fixated mostly on North American land and also in Asia. But still, for the most part, throughout the 19th century, the United States stays out of Europeans' business. The Europeans stay out of the business in the Americas in terms of any sense of political force, colonization, military power. And whether this was a complete byproduct of Monroe's doctrine or some other circumstances came together, the fact is that there was little in this kind of negative engagement that Monroe was warning about really until the end of the 19th century, a lot of it going back to exactly what was said in the doctrine presented by James Monroe in December of 1823. That is James Monroe and Doctrine, from the life of James Monroe. For more Presidential Chronicles, check out my books on Amazon.com. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles.